The value-added tax sits at 16% and will sit at 16% by next year if the government continues to raise its revenue. Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana announced a 0.5% VAT increase for this year. Let's talk about the budget that was tabled by the Finance Ministry yesterday. And to do that, here is Professor Peter Baur with me, and he's Associate Professor at the School of Economics at the University of Johannesburg. Prof, good morning to you. So less than 24 hours later, we've had all of the reactions, some of them not entirely unexpected, from political parties who are resisting certain aspects of that budget. I'm wondering, just perhaps as an opener, to talk about the fate of the budget in that incarnation that we saw tabled yesterday. Of course, it's going to be subject to perhaps some retooling and some changes as we go along, and opposition parties have their say and vote on various aspects. Your thoughts on that?
Yes, if we have to take a look at the nature of our economy currently, we're sitting at a very low levels of economic growth, literally low, well below the 2%, as the minister mentioned. We're talking about very large levels of unemployment that we persistently existing in our economy, and we're also talking very large debt feature, about 72% of our GDP currently. So as the economy is standing, we're rather sluggish, and we're rather dependent as well on international events too. So what is happening with the Trump administration, the tariff wars between the European Union, Canada, Mexico, and China is all going to be affecting us going forward. In terms of to stimulate the South African economy right now, there's some key factors we need. We need to do serious, significant investment expenditure is going to be required. And we need to also take really cognizance of your middle income homes, predominantly your tax base, which comes predominantly from your middle income areas. So where we're sitting is an increase of a 0.5% VAT will definitely have an impact on the economy. And also, but the benefits of this additional tax might not necessarily generate the kind of results that our minister's looking forward to. One of them being the very low multiplier effect, which means that as household income gets spent in the economy, it becomes somebody else's income, which then gets reinvested back into the economy. And this sort of is that multiplier effect that we so regularly rely on for our economy to grow. So given that, the support structure for our middle income is where the real pressure of this particular budget is coming from. We're talking about...
Let me stop you there, Peter, because I want to just reach into what you've just said. Rightfully so, we are concerned with the extraordinary band of those who are poor, who are at risk and very vulnerable in our economy, and that's absolutely right. So when we think about VAT and so on, and the reason that underpins the opposition's opposition to those increases is something that we have to take very seriously. But what you talked about there, the pressure of that middle band, the tax base, which is really comprising of those individuals and the pressure that they are under, it almost seems unpalatable to talk about those because, people would say, well, it's privilege and, they can manage themselves much better than those who are more exposed. But it is worth resting on that subject a little bit more. So tell me a little bit more about how much pressure that is and how much of a risk that is, bearing in mind, as you say, obviously everyone pays VAT, everyone pays taxes in South Africa. If you buy anything, you're a taxpayer. But the majority of the tax is coming from that band. Just reach into that a bit more for me.
Yes, absolutely. So your middle income homes are often those that are also your employer base too. So as long as there's, shall we say, the challenge at the middle income household is the lack of savings. I mean, we're talking about negative savings rates of almost an entire percent in the moment. So where households are actually in savings, households themselves are coming into debt. And that's putting additional pressure. We need that additional savings so that we can reinvest back into the economy. But from the middle income households, that reinvestment of savings is critically important for their businesses, where they reinvest in businesses, create business growth, and create additional job opportunities. So by putting pressure on your middle income households, it's also constraining them in terms of specifically kind of decisions they're going to make, where they're going to put their household spending into. Is it going to be education, health, reinvesting in their businesses, growing the economy? And that middle income group is constantly under pressure. It's kind of different from the very poor, where for example, access to additional support structures that is not necessarily available to them, as you just mentioned rightly earlier on. They're often considered the more privileged, but also the very rich are not necessarily going to be impacted by this. So my concern on this particular budget, which is kind of restrictive in many ways, is that we're putting pressure on that middle income group, constraining their abilities to reinvest back into that economy. And of course, that puts pressure on them not just in terms of VAT repayments, but also in terms of their support and their savings. So on the one side, you've got national debt that we have to worry about, but on the other side, we've got household debt that we need to worry about. And of course, this comes through the challenge between, the monetary and the fiscal policy that should be working hand in hand in stimulating the economy.
Yeah.
And with very low levels of economic growth, we're restricting the middle income, and they're responsible for job creation.
Well, let's talk about stimulating the economy. I mean, we've seen first of all, last year we emerged as the top performing economy on the African continent, GDP north of $403 billion last year. So we are also one of the fastest growing economies in the world. However, it comes against the backdrop of really poor growth. We've expanded at less than 1% annually for the last decade or so. We've seen some projections on our economic growth, I think around 1.6% or 1.8% or so. And a lot of people say, well, that's pie in the sky. We're not actually going to reach that. So how does this budget capacitate us for the next 5 years to be able to reach levels of growth that are, the bonus of which is felt by many more South Africans? We increase our employment. We increase the number of people that can credibly play in the South African economy. Does this budget set us up for that?
Yeah. Yes, you're right, because it seems like our Minister of Finance is actually gambling against the fact that we will achieve higher levels of economic growth going forward. If we achieve the higher levels of economic growth, then maybe some of the ideas that he's implementing might achieve those kind of goals that he's hoping to achieve. For example, increase additional revenues, be able to deal better with the debt challenges, etc. But we are literally gambling against the fact that we'll grow more. And even though we are producing a very large GDP, it's the change in this output, this change in this productivity that we're really concerned about. What is happening is if the population growth rate is higher than your economic growth rate, then literally we're all becoming poorer as we go along. And our minister is literally gambling that we will achieve the high levels of economic growth that he requires for his budget to become completely, shall we say, feasible. However, given the international uncertainty right now, and given the huge political constraints that we're under from trade wars, tariffs, exports, relationships with America, these are all going to impact us on us quite significantly too right now. It is definitely important that we do manage our debt. And the minister mentioned 22 cents of every rand gets paid off in terms of debt. But at the same time, we need to stimulate this economy to drive that economic growth. And even if our inflation is sitting at about, let's say, 3.2%, which is right at the lower benchmark for monetary policy, we can't rely on the fact that those interest rates are going to come down sufficiently fast enough to be able to stimulate the economy. So to stimulate the economy, we're navigating very difficult, uncertain and challenging waters right now.
Prof. Baur, I just want you to do a quick comparison for us. I mean, I know that, a number of countries have a high debt to GDP ratio. And as you say, I think our debt repayments are the second biggest expenditure that we have, at around 22%. And that keeps increasing every year. For an emerging economy, though, is this an uncomfortable level to be at?
I right now think that if you take a look at, for example, what is happening in some of the European economies, Germany right now, for example, they're talking about removing debt breaks or debt boundaries right now to try and increase the amount of investment that they wish to put into infrastructure, military support, etc. So it is a very serious concept. The debt repayment factor is serious. However, there are times when we need to negate against, do we want economic growth or are we going to better manage our debt? The debt problem is a future thing, something that's going to impact the generations that come after us. But right now, current economic growth and the need for economic growth might outweigh the challenges that we're experiencing with debt. we really do need to invest in our economy, but government has a very limited tax base from which to draw from. Again, back to our middle income predominantly, and our income earners. Our income tax is our biggest earner right now. So it's a very difficult decision that government needs to make, but to stimulate our economy, and we need something to drive that economic growth, to re-establish that investor confidence, to create those kind of policies and an environment to bring investors back into our economy. And pretty much in line with what we've seen happening in other countries, like as I used Germany as an example a few moments ago, infrastructural investment spending is a good thing. It creates jobs, it induces additional spending, and has a significant impact. We've spoken about that at previous budget speech, and so it's the same old again. We're talking about investment into infrastructure and transport. This we've heard before, but going forward, this investment needs to have real impacts on our economy. And so where the minister is actually sort of supporting himself is talking about the way in which we're structuring the state institutes. For example, restructuring power utilities, water supply, municipality structures, because that is where we have a lot of, shall we say, spending that's taking place, but not generating the kind of results that the economy needs. So maybe better monitoring and evaluation is required. And he referred to that in the budget speech, which is positive. But right now, our economy is truly, truly constrained. And so maybe we could potentially tap into that additional spending. But if we're tapping into additional spending, we need all the other policies and processes to be in place to make sure that that spending gets properly monitored and actually has an effect on our economy.
Because we've got millions of bodies that are ready to work, Prof. Baur, when you think of almost 17 million people of working age capable in our country and in this economy, who are simply lying idle, and who, have to resort to desperate measures, or even, tap into the grant systems and so on. That's a base that we can use. So many other opportunities. I mean, you spoke, of course, about infrastructure, and there are billions and billions. I think it's a R1 trillion over the next 3 years that have been dedicated to infrastructure, transport and logistics, energy, infrastructure, water and sanitation, and so on. How do we activate this almost 17 million, ready, warm bodies to play their role in this economy?
There again, our spillover is the shall we say, the multiplier effect is really important here. But we've got programs and policies in place that we can tap into. Our expanded public works program, for example, has been used in America in the earlier days, the 1929 to 1933, to alleviate the pressure of the Great Depression. We've seen public works programs since then being used significantly throughout the years to try and stimulate the economy. So the potential for government to create jobs. Now, let's bear in mind, government is not a job creator. That's not their primary objective. But for the opportunities are there to create these kind of working opportunities. But again, the structuring of our expanded public works program in terms of wages that we're paying people, the total capitalizing on our arts and cultural sector, tourism and trade are really significantly important again for us. So we have the opportunity to create work opportunities. And then, but those need to be appropriately managed on different levels that are really important. So yes, we do have the ability, but we need that growth to bring those investors back in. We need to build that investor confidence again. We need to really establish those stronger trade relationships with other countries and tap into all that potential that we as South Africa have. And we do have the potential.
Well, let's see if that potential can be harnessed correctly and effectively in this economy. We're sitting at a point in South Africa right now where we really have to get moving with some speed and urgency and intention to make the movements that are necessary for our country's growth and for whatever we're embarking on to be sustainable. Prof. Baur, thank you very much for your time. Associate Professor at the School of Economics at the University of Johannesburg. Again, another short break and we'll be back.